if everything's just meta jokes about itself, aren't we just going to like circle in on ourselves and like
Mm-hmm.
explode at some point here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Boy,
anyways, let's do a
boy,
podcast about podcasting.
yeah. Speaking of meta and circling in on ourselves, boy.
So this is episode number 115 of Show Me Your Mic on the Goodstuff.fm podcast network, which can be found at Goodstuff.fm. I guess that's circling in on itself as well.
Kind of self-explanatory, yeah.
Yeah, it's in the name. And I'm Chris Enns, iChris on Twitter. If Twitter is still around when you're hearing this or watching this later, if it's still alive, today is Twitter Day, Twitter D Day, Twittery Day.
T-
I don't know.
it's the day where folks are deciding to leave the platform for 30 days, I guess. I don't know if
Right.
there is an actual deactivation or deletion process, or if there is, they leave and then have 30 days to come back. The thought is that this will put pressure on Twitter to change its policies in a way that can help better benefit the community. I think there's a much deeper seated issue about Twitter, though, when it comes to how they create community and the whole idea of like, brands are messaging each other publicly to drum up fun and interest in like products and surge and things like that. We talked about it last night on morning show that it's just kind of silly, and I'm super duper over it. Outside of that, there's also a boatload of harassment and Nazis and bad things going on. So overall, it just doesn't. It's not a great place. Nor really was it ever. I think maybe this is just a time for folks to reevaluate some of their social priorities and stuff. Twitter's had a huge impact on my life, though. I've probably the most recent job I got was probably because of Twitter. Sending seeing a job posting, sending a DM, and it's wild to think like there there is such good that can come of it, and there is such evil that can also come from it.
Yeah, it's hard for like I back in the day. I think it legit was a good platform, and there was just like it was just more nerdy, very obviously white dudes primarily, probably, and a lot of tech focused people, and so like it was safe in that sense, I
It's
guess.
a bubble.
Yeah,
It was a bubble, and folks have created their own bubbles
yeah,
as well.
but yeah, like you and I probably wouldn't know. Like, it's hard to imagine a world where if we just all stayed blogging and didn't have something like Twitter. Like it's hard to imagine that something else like it wouldn't have come along at some point.
Yeah.
Some sort of like more connected way of immediately connecting way of communicating. But let's imagining a world where we just all stayed blogging. It's hard to imagine that you and I would have crossed paths.
True. That is very true.
Podcast listening was kind of like you tweet out a thing about whatever 5x5 or Leo Laporte or whatever, and then you kind of like look and see who else is responding to the tweets
Yeah,
from
yes.
Dan
Yes.
Benjamin or whoever, and they're like, oh, they're nerds as well who enjoy this thing.
Yep. I mean,
So,
that's the whole idea of community, and a lot of times the communities outside of that would branch off of Twitter and then kind of reconnect through Twitter. And so I don't know. I want to see what happens today. I don't have. I don't know. I feel like I should have a horse in this race, maybe, but I don't. My horse is tired, and it is both all four legs are broken. It's just lying
yeah.
on the ground. So I don't know what to do.
And it's arguing with Nazis all day. So
Boy, is it.
that's what the funny thing. I know, like people are like, well, just like mute everything and whatever. And like you can go back to that bubble. You can very easily with the Twitter clients. I was listening to another podcast where they're like, I just mute stuff, and if somebody's talking about garbage stuff, I just unfollow or block or whatever. Like you can do that. But I think what's interesting with this, and it feels like it's probably like a minuscule percentage of the overall Twitter population that actually is going to take some sort of action, which is not to downplay what they're doing. Like it's still any amount of protest, however big or small, is still, I think, if you feel strongly enough about it, then by all means you still do it. Doesn't matter if it's 10 people out of a million, but it does feel like it's a little blip, and so I don't know that on a Twitter scale level, like hopefully there's big enough people that are tweeting about it or talking about it that it will cross the desk of Jack, what's his face, Twitter Jack,
Hmm.
and at least cause a little bit of a blip in terms of their day to day. But
Well,
I don't
I
imagine
mean,
some of the like
It seems like it
high
is.
end companies that are going to be like, oh shoot, we
Yeah.
lost engagement on whatever. I don't know. Like it's hard to imagine that's going to make that big of a dent, but maybe it will. I'm pessimistically optimistic.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think that a good way to go about that would be pressure the folks who are giving Twitter money. That then puts financial pressure on Twitter, and then that ends up being. I guess
Yeah,
that's the whole idea of here's how you block 14,000 different accounts, and so that you don't see ads and you don't see anything else. They can't contact you. Um, I don't know. It's kind of a tough situation where the answer is clear, but how you can educate folks about it and who's going to know about this whole thing is it's not clear. There's going to be folks who don't know what Twitter D-Day is. They won't know that the 17th is the day that lots of folks are leaving the platform for very specific reasons.
hmm
So we'll see what happens. I think it's probably a good way to get into some of the news from the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks that we've been
it's been
out.
a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we. I'm just gonna throw open the thing here. The sheet. There's just before I'll mention this at the beginning of the show in case I forget at the end that you can send in questions and comments for the show if you use hashtag AskSMYM on Twitter, and it'll get auto categorized. I know we've been on for a little while and haven't tweeted and stuff to remind folks of that. And for some reason, I've got two Google spreadsheets that are collecting all the questions somehow.
hmm,
I think if this then that is multiplied and
run amok.
created a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, the big stuff that was kind of that we saw across our virtual desks, as it were, is a lot of like support related stuff. So the main one that we've kind of keep coming back to is Anchor.
Hmm.
Um, has added ability in the inside the app, which actually it must then Apple gets a cut of that, right? If it's inside the app, isn't that how that works, or is it does it link to
Uh,
other services? I
so
forget.
I
Anyways,
the link itself, I actually haven't seen it in the Twitter app, or not the Twitter. Boy. I haven't seen it in the Anchor app. I have seen the website version of that, and it will load up Google Play on, or not Google Play, Google Pay on my device to be able to pay more easily. But I don't know how they're processed actually in the application, or even if they are at all. They may just point you to a support page that is on Anchor proper.
right. So today's special, our podcast on good stuff that you and Kenny do
Hmm.
has listener support. So how have you quit your job, or where are you at with listener
so, so
support?
so we made the push on that this week. We made sure to get it in the end of the show when we say like, hey, this is where you can find more about this show and check out other specials that we've done. Um, we have not seen any interest in it, nor have we seen, um, I don't know, someone pledging and then canceling. We haven't. There hasn't been any interest at all. But I should say, on average, we get about 25 to 30 listens for each episode. So if you put that in perspective, right now conversion rate is 0. But even if there was one, it would be a pretty high conversion rate
Yeah,
at that point. So I think what Anchor did was they made it really easy to just flip the switch. It was a literal switch that I posted in our Discord channel where it was like, should I do this? And the downside is kind of 0. If we're
yeah,
going to be putting content on Anchor anyway, we may as well flip that on. Um, but it all processed through Stripe. I set up the payment stuff through there. I am not sure what the actual payout would be on these payments. I should say also they're recurring payments. This isn't like a
yeah,
micro transaction type thing where I want to toss you 25 cents, or for every clap I get in Anchor, it's like 5 cents, right? I would love that where I'm not really tracking. It's almost like the bits model of
yeah. On
Twitch
Twitch,
where
yeah.
I clap whenever, and then I get a bill at the end of the month for $450 because I loved too many podcasts.
Too much clapping.
Too
Yeah,
much clapping. But that would also kind of it socializes it, and it would show like, hey, when you see bits in the chat room, you're like, oh, cool. Thanks for the bits. That's kind of like this social proof of, oh, maybe I should be doing that, so that
hmm
they know that I like to listen to this podcast. But I don't know. We we don't really get much favoriting of the podcast anymore. We did for a little while there while it was featured on the homepage. We haven't seen any presses of that recurring donations button. I should say, added this same type of thing to the Good Stuff feeds. So every show on Good Stuff has the ability to have a support button now. It'll be only in the feed, kind of the same way that it is for Anchor shows. But this was all based on a tweet from Marco Arment saying, podcast hosts and app makers, let's make it easier for podcasters to surface donate/pay/membership links in their own UIs with a standard semantic way to denote payment URLs, blah, 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 right? So he's looking for something to put inside of show notes that kind of kicks something off in his app's UI, Overcast, that will then display some sort of support button. And that's kind of the same thing that Anchor is doing, but only on their platform and only the way that they're doing it. And hopefully Anchor is going to kind of support the way that Overcast is doing, because we do have some Overcast listeners for on our Anchor show. But they landed at this payment class for the actual little button that is in there. So now all shows on Good Stuff have this support payment URL ability that you should start seeing in your Good Stuff shows. At the top, it'll say like support, show me your mic, and if you click that link, it'll take you to whatever support you want. I mean, you can set it to be charity. You can set it to be like I set ours to the Anchor support page. It's just, you can put whatever in there, and I think it's a good way to especially surface it in places like Overcast in the UI. And I wanted to make sure that as soon as this update goes out for Overcast, it's not out yet, but you load up a Good Stuff show and it's like, oh, hey, they already support it. So that's
and hopefully they're like, obviously the other apps like Marco it's funny how like a single individual developer can have some sway, because within, I don't know, hours of him tweeting that, like I saw so many different, like our host Transistor and um FeedPress and Fireside and like a bunch of podcast hosting platforms right away, or like, because it is trivial basically to add it to a podcast feed. And so
yeah.
It's great that they're doing that. And it's, because I think Marco's reaction to like Anchor doing that is to be inspired to like make a air quotes open way of doing it rather than having to be tied into Anchor. And right now there isn't a way to like automatically make that button in an Overcast, just like start a transaction.
Yeah, you got to think though, like this is not the first time in 2018 that Anchor is driving innovation in the podcast world. Like there's a link that you put in here from Manton Reese.
Manton Reese, yeah.
And he's writing about Anchor and whether podcast hosting should be free. I think a caveat to all of his commentary on this is that he's the founder of Micro.blog, and they have podcast hosting integrated into their services and things like that. And they have their own application for recording short podcasts and posting them up into Microblog. So it's not a totally unbiased opinion, but it is a valid opinion, I think, in that the podcasting world is kind of it's not full of huge players when it comes to the folks who are driving innovation. The way that innovation in podcasting is driven is from these tech folks who are changing applications and changing the way that people listen to podcasts. And someone who just got into podcasts maybe wants to upgrade to a new listening experience. They'll choose something like Overcast, but they won't know who's behind it or the history of like, why did this even get started? They won't know that they were an innovator in the whole auto leveling and splicing out the silence from a podcast and things like that, that we know are actually the things that are driving the industry right now. So it's interesting to just sort of see that flip between all the tech folks on Twitter, just tie back in, and now this multi-million-dollar podcast hosting service called Anchor.
Yeah. Like that's where bigger players are getting into the space. Pocket Cast was acquired by NPR.
Yeah.
So there's like corporate interest in like getting on the back end of it, not just creating podcasts now, obviously, which is why Good Stuff is announcing that we've now purchased. I was trying to come up with the smallest. I was looking at our stats to see like we've purchased Other. That's the
Mm-hmm.
our podcast player that
Our pod,
we're
yeah,
coming
yeah,
out with.
yeah. That's sort of
Actually, that would be in analytics in our transistor analytics and others. I'm sure it's like there's obviously web browser, web player, Pocket Cast, Apple
yeah.
iOS, Overcast, iTunes, Android, Unknown, Android, Downcast, and then Other. And so we should just come up with our own podcast player called Other, and then it would be like Other is like amongst the most popular.
Wow, I can't believe it. They must be really, yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's like
yeah,
the Google, like the old yellow pages or whatever, like naming your business AAA,
yeah.
just
Yep,
so you're at the first page.
yep.
All right, all right.
Other
Let's
dot
yeah.
FM, not bad,
Kenny's registered it for us
not
already.
bad.
Thanks, Kenny. So look
uh,
for that. It's coming probably next week. We'll have it finished, polished
yeah,
off.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of testing ideas and finishing things up, do you want to talk a little bit about something that you launched this week?
yeah, well, I mean, launch is a very generous term that you use for
Okay, all right.
a landing page with an email
Announce.
sign up form. Yeah,
How can I
but
add more weight to this? Because it's a long thought out process. There's a lot of thought behind it, but you're trying to weigh the amount of time you're spending in something and the amount of money and effort that you put behind it before it's a proven idea.
yeah, and I know that like, especially amongst people like me, I feel like who are more like entrepreneurial driven and definitely in the sort of the cliche movie mode of like idea guys and like long on ideas, short on execution. That there's a certain amount of currency you have when you're like, hey, I'm going to do this thing, and does anybody want to come along and do this? And then if that happens over and over again, people kind of get tired of following you on your thing. And so I'm always hesitant to try and like I'll bounce ideas off you or my wife or like friends and stuff and be like, oh, it'd be so cool if this could happen, and then I won't. I'm reluctant to put it out into the world. And so what Kyle's referring to is I sort of soft launch, I guess, in terms of Twitter, because Twitter's dying today, so obviously nobody's going to see it anymore. But the idea of building a bit of a community for podcasters, which isn't in itself isn't all that unique, but uh, a walled garden for podcasters, I guess, where we can get together other podcasters who are either starting out a little bit further up the road, maybe a place that you'd kind of like hang out for a year or two to develop your podcast or get better at your podcast or get just some encouragement from other podcasters and hopefully improve your craft and help others by improving or sorry you would get better at your craft by helping others along on their journey as well and answering questions, but everybody being sort of on that playing field of like we're all in this together and not
Hmm.
allowing for because a lot of the Facebook groups and the podcast how to podcast groups and stuff like I've joined a bunch of them on Facebook and over the years on the internet, and they kind of devolve into some like guy from Libsyn and a guy or girl from like a podcasting expert, and in the end what they just end up arguing with each other about whether you should be using Libsyn or whatever hosting platform, and or pitch to like be a podcast editor for them or hire them to teach you their course about whatever. And so not that like there's plenty of good in a lot of those forums and stuff and like that you can find in terms of tips and tricks and stuff, and but what I kind of like is more of like a what you'd get if you had a weekly meetup for podcasters maybe in your
Hmm.
city or whatever. But I know that Saskatoon where I live isn't big enough for that, and but it's kind of like a yeah, I keep coming back to the word community more than like any sort of douchey business term.
Yeah, a
And so
co-op or like
yeah,
yeah, I can't really come up with any other good
and
words for
like
that.
you when I was talking with you, what kind of like pushed me over the edge with it a bit too is the idea of like like not just talking about stuff, but actually having somebody like me and like folks like you who are in there to like encourage with maybe like a weekly challenge for like here's a topic for everybody to mention on their podcast just so
Hmm.
that then everybody can go out and like talk about it and then come back share that link, and but not in like a huge link building effort and market growing thing, but just as like practicing that skill the same way that you might have like you had brought this up of like a whether it's a workout coach or like a fitness coach or something who's like you're basically paying them to tell you to do stuff. I forget the analogy you use, but like just like somebody you're paying someone to give you willpower in a sense. And that's
Yeah.
almost what it is like. So whether it might be like a $5 a month thing or whatever, it's not going to get me rich by any means, but like just as a way of like putting a bit of money behind this thing and saying, okay, I want to be held accountable to like, I'm hoping to launch this podcast in July. And then this community of people would care enough about, you and what you're doing to then say, hey, it's July. How's it going? Like, and not like rake you over the coals if you don't do it, but just
Right,
like,
right.
how can we help you? And so something in that sort of realm, I guess, is what I'm
There's
thinking.
also a way of like seeing other people do well around you. I think kind of will energize you, even if you yourself are not doing, something exactly as you want to be doing it. Seeing like, oh, hey, Chris talked about this topic today. Boy, does that kind of inspires me. Just seeing that the episode went out, that does inspire me to go and record on my own. I
Yeah.
think accountability is also one of the key words about that is um, podcasting is not a short game. It's definitely a long game. And so the more encouragement you can get along the way to continue to do this more and more, I think is it's ideal in at least in this medium. It's I don't envision it being like I think the whole reason for trying to see if you have interest in this type of thing too is so that folks don't just pop in and pop out and not contribute or not
Yeah.
in like literally invest themselves and their money into a community that hopefully can help each other. I think this happens on Twitch quite a bit, and I'm trying to learn more about this whole world of like kind of like you've got your hype team, right? You've got your
Right.
folks who on the regular show up into the chat room. They'll throw bits at you, they'll watch ads, they'll moderate your chat, they'll help you out, and it's not just kind of focused on one place. You go to a place, you make some friends, and then they kind of like share. It's not in like a pyramid scheme kind of way, but in you go and you support the other folks that are in the same community, but by kind of reciprocating the hype, if you would, or the chat and stuff. And I don't think it's an artificial way of bumping up numbers, but I do think it is a very good like moral support way of
Hmm.
trying to encourage folks to do more. And I feel like I'm kind of in a rut with that stuff too. So this type of thing really entices me. Um, I don't know. Have you heard any feedback in terms of like price point or what folks would be willing to pay for something like this?
No, and that's where like I was gonna say the framework for it. It's not an exact copy, as it were, but I've talked with him about it. But Justin Jackson, a friend of mine, fellow Canadian, he actually is the guy who helped build Transistor.fm, which is where we host our podcast. So whatever conflict of interest, I guess maybe I don't know. Anyways, but he has a thing that he's built over the years. He called it Mega Maker, which is kind of a cool. It's a private community for solopreneurs, is how he builds it. But it's basically like people who make web stuff, but not podcasts. It would be more like a web app. You're launching some sort of an iOS app maybe, or
Hmm. Hmm.
coders, programmers, designers, marketers, those kind of folks getting together. And it's kind of like in a business sense, I guess you could call it like an incubator almost for some of these folks. But it is just like a way to like hang out, say what you're doing, get some feedback, and people stick around for like a year or two in this community, and then their thing maybe grows big enough, and they move on, and that's fine. And so what he's kind of done as pricing wise is instead of like the monthly thing where you're like, I don't know how long I want to do this for, maybe, or you're you he's gotten people where they'll like pay for a month and then leave once they've sort of gotten whatever they think out of it and don't really give back into it.
Hmm.
Is he just does a lifetime access, and I forget, he doesn't right now. It's not open. It's one of those things where it's like a waiting list to get in, and then but he found people were like not wanting. It was, yeah, just he's experimented a whole bunch with different price points and different ways of pricing this kind of thing, and kind of landed on this idea of paying once for lifetime access to it. And I kind of something with that resonates with me in this, where maybe it wouldn't be, it would amount to what would the equivalent of like $5 a month for 2 years, let's say, or maybe a year or whatever, I don't know.
Hmm.
But something where it's a little bit more skin in the game up front, to get in. But then once you're in, you're hopefully invested because you've put that in. And I don't know. That's a fine line between like, hey, Chris, it looks like you're trying to get rich off of charging people money to have a forum.
On like a false promise or like
Right.
on something that's not proven.
Yeah, exactly. And
Mm,
so I feel like there's the private community of people who are like sort of driven around the same kind of idea. That's a proven thing that can work. Whether it can work in podcasting, because it is a harder medium to share your work in
hmm
and to demo your work and get feedback on your work, because it takes time to listen to a podcast and give feedback. Unlike like a web app, you can just be like, here's the link. 5 minutes later, they can say it's working, it's great, awesome, it looks great on my phone or whatever. Like test it out stuff and give feedback. But podcasting and audio is a little more difficult, and so I don't know for sure that it'll work. I feel like there's a way that it could work, and it excites me to. I like helping folks out. It can't be like 24/7 tech support for podcast making
Right.
at that whatever price point that would make sense for folks to join in. Um, but anyways, that's sort of where the inspiration. And I've been kicking this idea around for like 4 years, and I remember 3 or 4 years ago thinking, oh, I should just try it, because Justin's been doing it, I think, since I forget when he started it exactly, like 2013. Um, so it's something that where I saw that, it was like right away, like thought, oh, that'd be awesome for podcasters,
hmm
and kind of just sat on it. So,
Well,
so
it's
the
also,
email, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's also one of those places where you want to encourage people to um, e- explain themselves a bit. And there's a lot about podcasting. We've talked about this before, but that's veiled in secrecy that no one wants to give away the secrets about how the sausage is made. And I feel like opening up, having a place where you can ask dumb questions like that, I guess, or
Yep.
there are no dumb questions in that world where you just want to know, hey, what's everybody doing for like their upload process or note making? Like we were just talking about that this morning off air, where I do notes one way through our CMS and you do notes a completely different way because we just have different needs, or we are, one is templatized, one is a very manual process. And it's that type of conversation that if I didn't know that you did it that way, that may be a huge epiphany to me where it's like, oh, I can just do it that way, do it the way that Chris is doing it. And I could save myself 25 minutes a day. And I think that those are the kinds of takeaways that creating a community, creating like an actual space to do this kind of stuff that is targeted specifically at podcasting, not that's just like a, hey, here's a good stuff community. We can talk about the good stuff podcasts, but folks are kind of afraid to talk about, how to, hey Kyle, how do you put together your show notes? Or, I mean, maybe it's my false thought that folks are interested in that. But I, from the perspective of like starting out in podcasting, I would want to know that. I would I wanted to know everything there was about
Yeah.
running a network and running a podcast and trying to get better at it and speeding things up. Um, I don't know. There folks who've been in the game for a long time too. Like you can get in a rut and you can feel like you're void casting. You're just talking to nobody, and you're sitting here in your office. It Kenny's
Yeah.
saying in the chat room, communities are helpful to put names and faces to all of the previously unknown anonymous listeners. Um,
That is true. Like I think that's where I've enjoyed Twitch, and then people who support on Patreon, and then
yeah,
are in our Discord, like meeting them. But this would be, I think, a little bit more like hitting the lonely podcaster out in Milwaukee, or I don't know, whatever. It doesn't matter where they are in the world, um, and like allowing them, who might be even doing okay at their thing, but just want like, it's kind of like a professional guild almost, in a sense, right? Where you're like, these are other folks who I can speak the podcasting language with, and they'll understand. I don't have to explain what podcasting is like I have to do with my friend, who I can talk football with maybe, or
right.
whatever. But they look at me weird when I say I'm a podcaster, and then like skip that sort of low level stuff and get into a bit meatier stuff in terms of the conversations about
Even if it's
podcasting things.
beginners, even if it's folks wanting to know, like, should I trust this free hosting service that has been offered to me, or what should I do? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it would be interesting to see where this goes. Even if this was just a community of 5 people, 6 people, that almost seems like like you said the analogy earlier of like a workout, a gym, right? Like a workout group, a workout class. Um, Getting folks to show up to the same place to do the same thing at a specific time is a huge challenge. So however you can impact a couple folks' lives, I think it would be cool. It would be really cool to see, especially in podcasting. I don't.
So
Sometimes it
yeah,
feels like we're all separate and we listen to each other's shows, but we don't interact with each other in a meaningful way. It's just all jokes, or it's just all like, I don't know.
yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, so there's a all it is right now is just a sign up form. The link is in the show notes to like a Mailchimp landing page thing. And so by putting your email address down, you're obviously not committing to anything. But it's just like, hey, I'd be interested in following where this goes to the next step, and I'll email people as it's like, hey, this is where I'm going next. So you kind of, if you want to sort of follow along with that process, and we'll talk about it probably here on Show Me Your Mic, but you can kind of like just sort of figure out or follow along with what's going on as I figure it out and give feedback, obviously, and I'll be looking for that kind of stuff as we do it. And maybe it fizzles out because there just isn't a need or an interest. Even that's where kind of like that lowest level of like signing up, putting your if people aren't willing to give me your email address to like show interest in something like that, obviously then it helps me gauge whether it's worth pursuing further. Because generally, what I would do is not worry about whether people actually want the thing. I would just try and build it, sign up for servers, set up a forum software,
yeah,
spend hours and
yeah,
hours and hours
yeah.
and a bit of money, launch the thing, and then be like, oh, I guess nobody wants it. It was just like an idea in my head. And now I've done all this work and I feel like garbage. So this is hopefully trying to like spin that around a little bit and work in a smarter way. Because I've seen things even like on the live streaming side. There's communities I've seen that where there is a couple of folks. It's a bit more on like the training and trying to sell coaching stuff, and I don't really want to do that. I've tried some of that. It's just not fun in a meaningful way for me.
Hmm.
And so, but even with that, like where like you hit on the idea of like I'm going to do a live podcast maybe on Twitch for the first time, and it would be awesome to know that Chris and Kyle and whoever Joe and Julie or whatever from my podcast community are going to show up and just cheer me on and watch and listen, and like so that the first time I try it, there's 4 people watching instead of 0, and they'll just give me feedback and help me get better at it.
Hmm.
And similarly with a podcast that you might put out, like where it's just I'm going to put this out into the world. It's on iTunes. We can all celebrate how you got it into iTunes and or Apple Podcasts, sorry, and on the web and listen to it. You know that at least 5 people besides just your mom are gonna or dad are gonna listen to it and get some honest feedback from people like, hey, if you did this or you could try and do this echo cancellation here or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, who are going to give you feedback on this craft that you're trying to get better at, and but not in obviously a harsh critical way where sometimes listeners will just be like, I can't listen because you don't have a high LPR40,
Well, and
so
you're at
sucks to be.
hopefully at that point you're at the spot where it's not just you saturating yourself with inspiration or
Right.
like
Inspiration
overthinking.
shower, is that what
Yes, and what all you do is like watch someone edit a podcast in a DAW, or I'm gonna watch a bunch of videos about someone's setup for their camera and stuff. There's a lot of that on YouTube, and it's really easy to get stuck in like the idea. I mean, even just for vlogging or whatever, like, oh man, that would
yeah.
be. It seems like it would be fun to do, but I'm just gonna watch a bunch of camera videos and watch people talk about gear and never actually do the dang thing. So
Yeah.
I think it is that extra little bit that'll get you over the hump, get you into the whatever this community ends up being, and paid into it in a way that then directly helps you benefit from it, and really keeps you going. It doesn't just it isn't just a source of inspiration. Hopefully it's like an actually actionable thing that hopefully a podcast comes out of.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's yeah. The link will be in the show notes. You can follow me on Twitter if Twitter's still around, and I'll tweet about it. I'm iChris on Twitter. I'll just also say too, like there's folks. I think it could be a cool way to like help folks using the Show Me Your Mic platform using as a sort of venue to like beta test an idea or
Hmm.
whatever, where we would interview about an idea and get feedback from other podcast listeners who maybe aren't part of the community. But this podcast could kind of be like the audio journal that other people are sort of get a glimpse into, and where we'd have a segment maybe on some of that. And so like there is a at goodstuff.fm/smym/ask is how you can also send in or get details of how to be send a question or comment for the show on Twitter. But also, if you wanted to have it, if you have a podcast already and you'd like to be interviewed by Kyle and myself, possibly, or one of us, like we did in the past on this show, we'd love to do that as well. And there's a bunch of folks who have already. I forgot to check the Google Sheet for a while, and there's there's like this again goes back to why I do some of this stuff where I set up an idea and then I assume nobody's going to be interested. It's sort of a self-defeating process and self-esteem and whatever. I'm going to counseling for that. But so folks like the Motoring Podcast, Sonics Inc., the Others Podcast, Birdland BS, Frazzlecast, which I don't even know what all these are necessarily. But folks who've already signed up to be notified and be contacted, we'll get in touch with you and arrange a time that makes sense for us to, interview you about your show and stuff and do a bit of that as well. So please, if you're interested in that, we aren't ignoring those requests. We're just getting through summer here and trying to get back into the regular flow of things. So that's again, goodstuff.fm/SMYM/ask is where you can send in, just fill out the form and we'll be in touch with you. So, yeah, I think that's probably a good spot to stop. Hey?
Yeah, I think so too.
Anything else?
No.
So check out Kyle's podcast about beer, podcast.untapped.com. You can hire me, lemonproductions.ca/hire, or if you need some podcast editing and or consulting on your podcast, if you just want to throw me some money for an hour or two of my time before the community launches. If you do it now, you can pay more. If you do it later with the community, if that gets going, then it'll probably be cheaper to get my feedback. I know how to do business.
Well, you should say too, this is not going to be a community where folks dump MP3 files and you edit it for them. I mean, it's
no, definitely not. That will not be covered by the user license fee.
That's right. That's right.
Unless, I guess, if it is, we could charge $1,600 a month per person. Then I'll happily edit your show.
Yeah, hey,
and it'll be locked at 5 people or something. But
that's right.
That's yeah.
You can unlock the next tier of KBPS by sending me some more money.
It's a ongoing Kickstarter that's called My Job.
I'm
Chris. You're what are you now?
I'm Hot Burps, but does that matter? Does it really matter anymore? I don't know.
It's all pointless.
We'll find out next week.
But definitely, if you want to follow along with the show, goodstuff.fm/SMYM is where the show can be found on the web.
That's right.
Twitch.tv/goodstuff_FM is where we record the show live, generally Friday mornings, 8 a.m. CST. What is it? 7 a.m.
It's
PST?
Yep.
Yeah. And we try and turn on the live stream as soon as possible, even before we start the official show. And you can play along at home.
Yep.
And join us in the chat room.
Ask questions, whatever.
Yeah. All that stuff. And subscribe to the Good Stuff feed on Twitch, and then you'll see when the morning show goes live, and there's a YouTube podcast that records live, and who knows whatever else we do. So I think that's it. Thank you, folks, for listening. Thanks for watching out there in Twitch land, and we'll see you again next week? ?
Oh, most definitely. All right.
All right.
I'll quit our recording.